The wind didn't just blow through the Teton Range. It screamed, tearing through the soul of anyone foolish enough to be out after dark. London Prentiss was beyond foolish. She was desperate. Standing over a lame horse with a frozen revolver in her hand, she thought this was the end. The snow was already burying the hem of her mourning dress when the shadow appeared. He was huge, wrapped in bear fur, and smelling of pine resin and old blood. She whispered it that she was lost, expecting death. Instead, he looked at her with eyes like shattered flint and said, "Then follow me home." And that was the mistake that almost cost us both our lives. The Wyoming Territory didn't care about grief. It didn't care that London Prentiss had buried her husband, Josiah, only 3 days prior, or that the deed to their homestead in Brimstone Creek had been seized by the bank before the dirt had even settled on his grave. The Territory only cared about who could survive the night, and right now the odds were stacking heavily against her. London adjusted the thin wool shawl around her shoulders, her fingers numb inside her kid leather gloves. The bay mare, a skittish creature named Buster, that she'd bought off a drunk prospector for her last $10, was done. The horse had stepped into a badger hole near the switchback at Dead Horse Pass and now stood three-legged and shivering head low against the biting wind. "I'm sorry," London whispered, her voice snatched away by the gale. "I'm so sorry." She wasn't just apologizing to the horse. She was apologizing to the memory of the life she thought she would have. She had come west from Boston with Josiah, promised a land of milk and honey. Instead, she found grit whiskey and a husband who gambled away their future with a man named Levi Granger before catching a fever that burned him out in a week. Granger. The name tasted like ash. The banker with the wet smile who had stood on her porch this morning and told her she had until sunset to vacate or be removed by the sheriff. She had run. It was cowardly, perhaps, but she had packed what little silver she had left, stolen Josiah's heavy Navy Colt revolver, and ridden for the mountains, hoping to reach the trapper settlement of Fort Bridger. But she had taken a wrong turn. The snow began to fall harder, not in flakes but in sheets of white static. The temperature plummeted. London looked at the revolver tucked in her sash. One bullet for the horse to end its misery. One for her. She raised the gun toward the mare's ear, her hand shaking violently. She couldn't do it. She lowered the hammer, sobbing dry, tearless heaves. "That gun's gonna jam if you keep the snow in the barrel." The voice was deep, rolling through the wind like thunder. London spun around, slipping on the ice, and nearly discharged the weapon into her own foot. A man sat atop a massive roan stallion 10 yards away. He was terrifying. He wore a coat made of thick buffalo hide, the fur matted with ice. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, revealing only a jaw covered in a thick, dark beard and a scar that ran from his cheekbone into the hairline. He held a Winchester rifle resting casually across his saddle horn. "Who are you?" London stammered, raising the heavy pistol with both hands. "Put that away, ma'am," he said. He didn't shout, but his voice cut through the storm effortlessly. "You fire that thing with hands that cold, you'll break your wrist." He nudged his horse forward. London stepped back, hitting the side of her lame mare. "Stay back. I have nothing. My husband is just up the trail," she lied. A pathetic lie. The stranger stopped his horse a few feet away. He looked down at her. His eyes were a startling pale blue, intelligent but hard. "There ain't no tracks on this trail for 10 miles, ma'am. Just yours. And your horse is finished." "I know," she whispered. "I'm lost." He looked at the sky, then back at her. "Storm's turning. This is a widow-maker. You stay here, you're dead, Hall, by midnight. You try to walk back to Brimstone, you're dead by 10. I can't go back to Brimstone, she said quickly, the fear of Levi Granger momentarily outweighing the fear of the giant on the horse. The man studied her face, noting the high cheekbones of a woman not born to this land, and the desperation in her eyes. He sighed, a puff of steam escaping his lips. He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped into the snow with a heavy thud. He was taller than Josiah had been, broader. He walked past her, ignoring the gun she still held, and knelt by her horse. He ran a gloved hand down the mare's leg. The horse didn't even flinch. "Broken fetlock," he said. He stood up, pulled a knife from his belt, a terrifyingly large Bowie knife, and looked at London. "Turn around." "No," she gasped. "Turn around, or do it yourself," he said flatly. London turned her back to the wind and the horse. She covered her ears. A moment later there was a wet, heavy sound, and the thud of the animal collapsing. She didn't scream, but her knees gave out. Strong hands grabbed her under the arms before she hit the snow. He hoisted her up as if she weighed nothing more than a sack of flour. "My name is Colton Graves," he said, setting her on his feet, but keeping a steadying hand on her arm. "My cabin is 3 miles up the ridge. It's the only shelter on this mountain." London looked at the dead horse, then at the endless white dark of the pass. "I have no money to pay you, Mr. Graves." Colton Graves looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't ask for money. But if you want to live to see the sun rise, you'll get on my horse. Now." London whispered, "I was lost." Colton swung up behind the saddle, after helping her up his chest, a solid wall of heat against her freezing back. He wrapped one arm around her waist to secure her, taking the reins with the other. "Then follow me home," he grunted. He turned the stallion up the steep, narrow path directly into the teeth of the storm. The journey was a blur of exhaustion and terror. London drifted in and out of consciousness, the rhythmic crunch of the stallion's hooves acting as a lullaby she fought against. Every time she slumped forward, Colton's arm tightened like an iron band, pulling her back against the rough fur of his coat. She smelled tobacco and cured leather. It was a masculine, dangerous scent, yet right now it was the only thing anchoring her to the world of the living. When they finally stopped, the wind had died down, replaced by an eerie silence. They were high up, dangerously high. A small log cabin sat nestled against a granite overhang, protected from the worst of the drifts. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Colton dismounted and pulled her down. Her legs were useless. The cold had settled deep into her bones. He didn't say a word, just scooped her up into his arms and kicked the heavy wooden door open. Inside it was dark, illuminated only by the dying embers of a hearth. He kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the wail of the wind. He carried her to a pile of furs near the fire and set her down. "Don't go to sleep," he ordered, his voice rough. "You sleep, now you might not wake up." He moved efficiently, lighting a kerosene lamp and throwing fresh logs onto the fire. The light revealed a space that was sparse but meticulously organized. Traps hung on the walls alongside cured skins, fox beaver, and wolf. There were books, too, which surprised her. A stack of leather-bound volumes sat on a rough-hewn table. London shivered violently, her teeth chattering. I'm cold." Colton knelt before her. He pulled her gloves off, chafing her hands between his own massive, calloused palms. "You're near hypothermic. We need to get these wet clothes off." London recoiled, clutching her shawl. No. He looked at her exasperated. Lady, I ain't interested in your virtue right now. I'm interested in not having to chip a frozen corpse off my floor in the morning. That dress is wet from the snow. Wet kills. He stood up and turned his back, rummaging through a wooden chest. He tossed a heavy flannel shirt and a pair of wool long johns at her. Put these on. I'll go tend the horse. You have 5 minutes. He walked out, slamming the door. London fumbled with the buttons of her dress, her fingers clumsy. She stripped down the cold air of the cabin, biting at her skin, before she scrambled into the oversized clothes. The shirt swallowed her. It smelled of him. She pulled the furs up to her chin just as the door opened again. Colton stomped the snow off his boots and hung his coat by the door. Without the bulky fur, he was still imposing, wearing a simple Henley shirt that clung to broad shoulders and suspenders holding up canvas trousers. He didn't look at her, moving instead to a small cast-iron stove to pour coffee from a pot. He handed her a tin cup. Drink. It's bitter, but it's hot. London took it with both hands, the heat seeping into her palms. Thank you. He sat in a rocking chair opposite her, stretching his long legs out toward the fire. He watched her over the rim of his own cup. So, who are you running from? London paused. I told you. I was lost. A woman like you doesn't ride a lame horse into Dead Horse Pass in a storm, unless the devil is at her heels, Colton said. Was it a man? A lawman? A banker? London said, the bitterness leaking into her voice. Levi Granger. Colton's hand froze halfway to his mouth. The silence in the cabin stretched thin and tight. He slowly lowered the cup. Granger, the one who runs the mercantile and the loan office in Brimstone. You know him. I know of him, Colton said darkly. He's a snake in a silk vest. What did you have that he wanted? My husband's land. And apparently me if I wanted to keep a roof over my head. London spat out, surprising herself with her own candor. Josiah died owing him money. Granger came to collect. Colton stared into the fire. Josiah? You're Josiah Prentice's widow? Yes. Colton stood up, abruptly pacing the small room. He looked agitated. I traded furs with Josiah a few times. He was a good man. Soft but good. He never mentioned he owed Granger. He didn't tell me, either, London said softly. Until the fever took him, he kept saying we were sitting on a gold mine. I thought he was delirious. Colton stopped pacing. He looked at London, his eyes narrowing. A gold mine, Josiah said that... He said the creek on our land ran clear, but the mud was heavy. He was going to file a claim. Colton walked over to the window, peering out into the blackness. Josiah Prentice didn't die of fever, ma'am. London's heart hammered against her ribs. What? Colton turned back to her, the firelight casting long shadows across his scarred face. I saw Josiah in town a week before he died. He looked healthy as a horse, but he looked scared. He told me he found something on his land, something that Granger wanted. He had a fever, London insisted, though doubt began to creep in like a draft. The doctor said, Dr. Calloway works for Granger, Colton interrupted, just like the sheriff does. London felt the room spin. You think they killed him? I think men like Levi Granger don't wait for nature to take its course when there's gold involved, Colton said. He walked back to the chair and sat down, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. And now you're here. If Granger knows you ran, he'll send men. Not to bring you back, to silence you. London set the cup down, her hands shaking again. Why are you telling me this? Because, Colton said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, 3 years ago, I had a claim up near Silver Lake. Granger wanted it. I said no. He touched the scar on his face. They burned me out, left me for dead. I came up here to get away from the world, Mrs. Prentice. But it seems the world has a way of climbing the mountain. He looked her dead in the eye. You're safe here tonight. But come morning, we have a choice. I can take you to the train station in Laramie, and you can go back east. Or you can stay, and we find out what was really on your husband's land. London looked at this stranger, this mountain man, who carried the same scars she felt on her soul. She thought of Josiah sweating and dying in their bed, begging her forgiveness for things he couldn't say. She thought of Granger's smug smile. A fire that had nothing to do with the hearth ignited in her chest. I have nothing to go back to in the East, Mr. Graves, London said, her voice steady for the first time. And I don't like leaving debts unpaid. Colton Graves studied her for a long moment. Then a slow, grim smile touched his lips. Good, he said. Then you better get some sleep. Tomorrow I teach you how to shoot something bigger than a rabbit. But as London lay back on the furs, listening to the wind howl, she didn't know that the storm outside was nothing compared to what was coming for them. And she certainly didn't know that Colton Graves was lying to her. He hadn't just traded furs with her husband. He had been the one who gave Josiah the map to the gold in the first place. And he had been waiting for the widow to show up for a long, long time. The sun rose over the Tetons like a bruised peach, spilling pale light onto the snow. London woke to the smell of frying bacon and the metallic tang of gun oil. She was alone in the bed of furs. Her body ached not just from the cold of the previous night, but from the sudden violent shift her life had taken. She sat up, pulling the heavy flannel shirt tighter around herself. Colton was at the table, stripping down the Winchester rifle with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't look up. Eat, he said, gesturing to a tin plate near the fire. Then we work. London ate the bacon and hardtack in silence, watching him. In the daylight, the scar on his face was less terrifying but more tragic. It pulled at the corner of his eye, giving him a permanent squint. You said you'd teach me to shoot, London said, wiping crumbs from her lip. Colton snapped the rifle back together with a sharp clack. I did. Put your boots on. Outside, the air was crisp enough to freeze breath in the throat. Colton set up 3 empty whiskey bottles on a fallen log 50 yards away. He handed London the heavy navy Colt she had stolen from her dead husband. It's a single action, Colton explained, standing behind her. You have to cock the hammer every time. It's slow, but it hits like a mule. London held the gun out. It wavered. Her wrists were thin, trembling. Steady, Colton murmured. He stepped closer, his chest brushing against her back. He reached around his large hands engulfing hers to adjust her grip. Don't choke it. Hold it like you're holding a bird you don't want to fly away, but you don't want to crush. The contact sent a jolt through London that had nothing to do with fear. For a widow of 3 days, the warmth of another man should have been scandalous. Instead, it felt like a lifeline. Aim for the middle one, he whispered near her ear. London squeezed her eyes shut and pulled to the trigger. Click. Open your eyes, Colton said, his voice flat. You can't kill what you can't see. I don't want to kill anything, London snapped, lowering the gun. Colton grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. His eyes were hard. Then get on that horse and ride back to Granger, because if you want to fight a man like that, you have to be willing to put a hole in him. He won't hesitate to put one in you. London stared at him. tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She thought of Josiah. She thought of the way Granger had looked at her like she was cattle to be branded. She turned back to the log. She cocked the hammer. She breathed out, just as Josiah used to do when he smoked his pipe. Bang! The middle bottle exploded into a shower of amber glass. Colton nodded a rare approval, softening his face. Again. They spent 2 hours in the snow until London's hands were raw and her ears rang. By noon, she could hit the bottles 3 times out of 6. Good enough for close range, Colton decided. Let's get warm. Back inside, while Colton went to chop wood, London warmed her hands by the stove. Her gaze fell on the wooden chest he had taken the clothes from the night before. Curiosity, a dangerous thing, pricked at her. Colton had said he knew Josiah. He said they traded furs. She knelt and opened the chest. It was filled with old clothes, a few pouches of coins and a stack of papers tied with twine. She shouldn't look, but she tugged the twine loose. The top paper was a deed, the Lazy J claim. But underneath that was a letter. The handwriting was messy, frantic. It was Josiah's. Colton. I found the vein. It's exactly where the map said. But Granger is sniffing around. If anything happens to me, the map is yours. You earned it in the war. I just want enough to get London back east. Jay. London stopped breathing. You earned it in the war. The map is yours. Colton hadn't just known Josiah. They were partners. And Colton, this stranger, owned the map. He hadn't saved her out of kindness. He needed her because she was the link to the claim. The door creaked open. London slammed the chest shut, shoving the letter into her pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Colton walked in, carrying an armful of wood. He stopped looking at her. His instincts were razor sharp. He sensed the change in the air. You look like you've seen a ghost, London. Just cold, she lied, standing up. She gripped the revolver in her pocket. Colton, how well did you really know my husband? Colton narrowed his eyes. Before he could answer, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. Wood splintered from the doorframe, inches from Colton's head. He didn't flinch. He dropped the wood and tackled London to the ground as a second shot shattered the window, sending glass spraying over the furs. "Stay down," he roared, crawling toward his Winchester. "Who is it?" London screamed, pressing her face into the rough floorboards. "Granger's hired guns," Colton growled, cycling the lever of his rifle. He peeked over the windowsill. "I see him. Up on the ridge. 400 yards. Can you hit him? Watch me." Colton stood up, exposing himself for a fraction of a second. He fired. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. A distant scream echoed down the canyon, followed by silence. Colton dropped back down, his face grim. "That was just the scout. If he's here, the rest are 10 minutes behind him. We have to run." "Run where?" London cried. "To the one place they won't follow," Colton said, grabbing his pack. "The devil's throat." London looked at the man she now knew was a liar. But as another bullet thudded into the log wall, she realized the truth didn't matter as much as survival. She scrambled up, clutching the gun. "Lead the way," she said. They left the cabin burning. Colton had knocked over the kerosene lamp as they exited a scorched earth tactic to cover their tracks and delay the posse. London watched the flames lick up the side of the only shelter she had known, feeling a strange kinship with the fire. Her old life was ash. Everything now was heat and danger. They rode double on the stallion again, the horse straining under the weight as they descended the backside of the ridge. The terrain here was brutal, jagged shale and ice-slicked rock. This was the Devil's Throat, a narrow canyon that wound through the mountains like a scar. "Why won't they follow us here?" London shouted over the wind. "Because this is Shoshone land," Colton yelled back, "and the Shoshone don't take kindly to trespassers. Granger's men are paid to kill, not to die for free." "And what about us?" "I have a truce with the tribe, or I did 5 years ago. Let's hope they have long memories." They rode until the sun dipped below the peaks, casting the canyon in deep purple shadow. The temperature plummeted violently. They found a small alcove under a rock shelf, protected from the wind, but open to the freezing air. Colton helped her down. His movements were stiff. As he turned to tend to the horse, London saw a dark stain on the sleeve of his Henley. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing. Colton glanced at his arm. A splinter from the doorframe had gouged a deep trench in his tricep. "It's a scratch." "It's deep," London insisted. She walked over, forcing him to sit on a boulder. "Let me see." She used a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat to bind the wound. The proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the sweat and gunpowder. He watched her hands, his breathing slowing. "You have good hands," he murmured. "Steady." "I had to be," London said quietly. "Josiah was sick for a long time before he died. I learned to be a nurse." At the mention of Josiah, the tension returned. Colton pulled his arm away, rolling down his sleeve. "That letter you found in the chest," he said abruptly. London froze. She hadn't told him. "I saw you put it in your pocket," Colton said, his voice devoid of anger, simply stating a fact. "You want to ask me about it, or are you just going to wait to shoot me in my sleep?" London pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket. "You lied to me. You said you barely knew him. The letter says you were partners. It says the map is yours." Colton poked at the small fire he had built. "I didn't lie. I omitted. Josiah and I served in the cavalry together. We found the map on a dead Confederate scout. I let Josiah take it because he wanted a life. I wanted solitude." "And now," London challenged, "did you kill him for it?" Colton looked up, his blue eyes blazing with a sudden ferocity that made London step back. "I didn't kill him. I loved him like a brother. But Josiah was a fool. He gambled. He drank. He told the wrong people about the gold. When he wrote me that letter, I came down from the mountain to warn him. I was too late. He was already dead." "So you waited for me," London realized, "because I'm the widow, because Granger would come for me. I waited because I knew you'd have the other half of the key," Colton said. "Key?" London asked, confused. "What key?" "The map is useless without the cipher," Colton explained. "Josiah carried the map, but he told me once that if anything happened, he'd hide the cipher with the thing he loved most." He looked at her. "He loved you, London. Where did he tell you to look when things got hard?" London thought back to those feverish nights. Josiah's rambling. "London, my heart. Keep my heart safe." Her hand went to her neck. Tucked inside her dress was a silver locket Josiah had given her on their wedding day. She never took it off. "The locket," she whispered. She unclasped the chain and opened the silver oval. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Josiah. She pried the picture loose with her fingernail. Behind it, folded into a square, the size of a stamp, was a piece of onion skin paper. Colton watched her, his expression intense. "That's it." London unfolded the paper. It was covered in numbers and symbols. I don't understand. I do, Colton said. It's coordinates, but not for a mine. What do you mean? The map doesn't lead to a gold mine, London, Colton said, leaning in close. Josiah was wrong about the gold. The Confederates were moving something else. Payroll, stolen Union bonds. It's a fortune in bearer bonds. That's why Granger wants it. Gold you have to dig. Bonds, you just cash them in. The revelation hung in the cold air. Millions of dollars. Enough to buy the Wyoming territory. Enough to kill for 1,000 times over. Granger knows, Colton said. He knows it's bonds. That's why he sent Boone. Boone, the man who shot at us. That wasn't just a hired gun. That was Silas Boone. He's the best tracker in the West. He doesn't stop. He doesn't sleep. And he's been hunting me for 10 years. London looked out into the darkness of the canyon. She felt small, fragile. So we're running from a banker and a legendary killer? No. Colton stood up, kicking dirt over the fire. We're done running. He offered her his hand. The coordinates point to the Black Rock Caves. 2 days' ride. If we get there first, we get the bonds. And with that money, we can buy our freedom. We can disappear. And if Boone catches us, Colton pulled his Bowie knife, checking the edge. Then the devil's throat gets fed. He looked at her, and for the first time, London saw something other than survival in his eyes. She saw desire. I won't let them take you, London. He swore, his voice rough. I promise you that. London took his hand. It was warm. She squeezed it back. Don't make promises you can't keep, Colton. I never do. But as they mounted the horse in the dark, neither of them noticed the shadow moving on the ridge above them. Silas Boone was watching. He lowered his spyglass, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He didn't shoot, not yet. He wanted them to lead him to the treasure. And he wasn't alone. Behind him, a dozen riders emerged from the gloom, their horses breathing steam. Levi Granger sat on a white mare, dressed in a pristine fur coat. Let them run, Granger whispered. The widow will lead us right to the vault. The chase was on, and the mountain was about to run red with blood. The geography of the Wyoming territory was not merely a backdrop, it was an antagonist, cruel and indifferent. To reach the Black Rock Caves, Colton and London had to cross the Snake River, a serpentine beast that even in winter refused to freeze completely. The current was too fast, churning black water through jagged sheets of ice that acted like guillotines for the careless. They reached the banks at mid-morning. The sky was a flat, oppressive gray, promising more snow. The roan stallion was blowing hard clouds of steam, erupting from his nostrils. He was a strong animal, but carrying 2 people through deep drifts for 20 miles had drained him. Colton dismounted and surveyed the water. He picked up a heavy stone and hurled it into the center of the river. It splashed, swallowed instantly by the dark current. It's deep, he muttered, and the bottom is slick rock. London slid down from the saddle, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Can we go around? Detour adds 2 days, Colton said, tightening the cinch on the saddle. Boone is maybe 6 hours behind us. Granger has fresh horses. If we go around, they'll be waiting for us at the caves. He turned to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. The intimacy of the gesture had become second nature to them over the last 24 hours. We have to swim it. London looked at the freezing water and felt a cold pit of dread in her stomach. We'll freeze. We go fast. We build a fire on the other side immediately. It's the only way. Colton mounted the horse and pulled her up behind him. Hold on to me. Do not let go no matter what happens. If you fall in the current, we'll drag you under the ice shelf." London wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in the fur of his coat. She could feel the tension in his muscles. Colton spurred the horse forward. The stallion balked at the water's edge, dancing sideways. "Higher!" Colton shouted, kicking his heels. The horse plunged in. The shock of the cold was instantaneous. The water swirled around London's boots, then her knees biting like 1,000 needles. The horse struggled his hooves, slipping on the riverbed stones. The water rose to the saddle. Ideally, they would float, but the current was ferocious. Halfway across, disaster struck. A massive sheet of ice, dislodged from upstream, slammed into the stallion's flank. The horse screamed a terrible human sound and lost its footing. The world tilted violently. London was torn from Colton's back and plunged into the darkness. The cold hit her like a hammer blow to the chest. The air was punched out of her lungs. She flailed her heavy skirts, dragging her down like anchors. She opened her eyes underwater and saw nothing but black turbulence. Panic flared bright and hot. Suddenly, a hand gripped the collar of her coat. She was hauled upward, breaking the surface, gasping and choking. "Kick!" Colton roared. He was treading water, holding her up with one arm, fighting the current with the other. The horse was gone, swept downstream. They were 20 yards from the far bank. "The ice!" Colton yelled. "Grab the ice!" They slammed against the shelf of ice lining the bank. Colton shoved London upward. She clawed at the frozen mud and snow. Her fingers numb, dragging her sodden weight onto the solid ground. She rolled over, coughing up water, and looked back. Colton was struggling. The weight of his buffalo coat and the ammunition belt was dragging him down. He slipped under, resurfaced, and slipped again. "Colton!" London screamed. She scrambled to the edge, lying on her stomach. She reached out her hand, straining. "Take my hand." He surged up one last time, his eyes wide with a rare flash of fear, and clamped his hand around her wrist. His grip was bruising. London dug her boots into the frozen earth and pulled. She wasn't strong enough to lift him, but she was an anchor. He found purchase with his boot on a submerged rock and heaved himself up onto the bank, collapsing beside her. They lay there for a full minute, gasping, the wind turning the water on their clothes into ice. Colton was the first to move. He sat up, his face grey. "Move," he rasped. "We stop now, we die." He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward a cluster of pine trees. There was no dry wood. Everything was buried in snow. But Colton Graves was a mountain man. He found resin-soaked pine knots and dead branches under the canopy. With shaking hands, he struck a match from his waterproof tin. The fire caught, small at first, then roaring. "Strip," Colton ordered. His voice was slurred. Hypothermia was setting in. London didn't argue. Modesty was a luxury for the living. They were on the verge of being corpses. She stripped off the freezing wet flannel and petticoats until she was shivering in her chemise. Colton stripped to his skin. They huddled together under the remaining dry fur blanket he had managed to keep strapped to his back during the swim. He pulled her against him, skin to skin, sharing what little body heat they had left. They stayed that way for hours, the fire crackling, the storm raging outside their small circle of warmth. "The horse," London whispered, her teeth finally stopping their chattering. "He had the rifle, and the food." "Gone," Colton said, his chin resting on the top of her head. "We have my revolver, 6 rounds in the cylinder, and 12 on my belt. We have a knife, And we have the map. We're going to starve. No, Colton said. I can trap, but we're on foot now. It's not 2 days anymore. It's 4. He pulled back slightly to look at her. The firelight danced in his pale eyes. He reached up and brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered on her cheek. You saved my life back there, London. You pulled me out. And you pulled me onto the bank. Most women, most men, would have run. I told you, she whispered, her heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. I don't leave debts unpaid. Colton stared at her, the hard lines of his face softening. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something heavier, thicker. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. London, he breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate tasting of river water and smoke and survival. London kissed him back, her hands tangling in his damp hair, pulling him closer. In the midst of the frozen wilderness, with death hunting them from behind, they found a fire that burned hotter than the pine knots. For a moment they weren't a widow and a drifter. They were just 2 souls clinging to existence. But the moment broke with the snap of a twig in the darkness. Colton pulled away instantly, the lover vanishing, the soldier returning. He grabbed the navy coat from the pile of wet clothes and aimed it at the darkness. Show yourself, he growled. A shape emerged from the trees. It wasn't Boone. It was a wolf, gaunt grey, watching them with yellow eyes. It lingered for a moment, then turned and vanished into the snow. Colton lowered the gun, but he didn't relax. A scout, he muttered. A wolf scout, London asked, pulling the fur tighter. Wolves follow the herds, Colton said grimly. Or they follow death. He knows something we don't. We move at first light. Walking through the high country in deep snow was a slow form of torture. Without the horse, every mile felt like 10. They had no food. Colton managed to snare a snowshoe hare on the second day, roasting it over a small fire. It was barely enough to keep them moving. London's boots were wearing thin. Her feet were blistered and numb, but she didn't complain. She watched Colton. He was weakening. The wound on his arm from the cabin shootout was infected. The red streaks were creeping up toward his shoulder. He tried to hide it, but she saw the sweat on his brow in the freezing air. On the 3rd afternoon, they entered a narrow valley flanked by towering red cliffs. The black rock caves were close now, maybe 10 miles. Stop, Colton whispered, dropping to a crouch. London froze. What is it? Silence. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Suddenly, the click of a dozen bowstrings being drawn echoed from the rocks above. Hands up, Colton said calmly. Slow. London raised her hands. From the cliffs and the trees, figures materialized. They were Shoshone warriors painted for war. Their breath misted in the air, their faces masks of stone. They held Winchester rifles and bows. One man rode forward on a paint horse. He was older, his face lined like a dried riverbed, wearing a headdress of eagle feathers. Colton spoke in a guttural language London didn't recognize. The man on the horse listened, his expression unchanging. He replied with a single, sharp word. What did he say? London whispered. He said we are trespassing on sacred ground, Colton replied, not taking his eyes off the chief. And the penalty is death. Colton spoke again, gesturing to his chest, then to the sky. He was arguing, pleading. The chief shook his head and raised his hand. The warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. "Wait!" London screamed. She stepped in front of Colton. The chief looked at her, surprised by her outburst. "He's sick!" London shouted, pointing to Colton's arm. She didn't know if they understood English, but pain was a universal language. She pulled up Colton's sleeve, revealing the angry, swollen wound. "He needs medicine. I am a healer." The chief stared at the wound. Then he looked at London. He barked a command. A warrior rode up, jumped off his horse, and grabbed London's arm, pulling her roughly toward the chief. "London!" Colton lunged, but a rifle butt to the stomach dropped him to his knees. The chief leaned down, looking into London's eyes. He pointed to a tent in the distance nestled against the canyon wall. Then he pointed to his own chest. No, not his chest. A small bundle strapped to his saddle. A child. He unwrapped the bundle. A small boy, maybe 4 years old, lay shivering, his face flushed with fever, his breathing rattling in his chest. Croup, or pneumonia. The chief looked at London, then made a gesture. "Fix him." London understood. It was a trade, a life for a life. "I need hot water," she said, miming the action. And eucalyptus, no pine, pine needles." She looked at Colton. Tell him I can help the boy." Colton translated his voice, ragged. The chief nodded. They were taken to the camp. It was a temporary hunting camp, not a village. London went to work. She didn't have her medical bag, but she had the land. She boiled water, creating a steam tent for the child. She made a poultice of crushed pine needles and mud for the boy's chest. She stayed up all night, holding the child upright so he could breathe, singing soft lullabies that seemed to calm the terrified warriors watching her. Colton sat bound by the fire, watching her with a mixture of awe and fear. By dawn, the boy's fever broke. His breathing smoothed out. He opened his eyes and asked for water. The chief entered the tent. He touched his son's forehead, then turned to London. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It was heavy, respectful. He walked outside and cut Colton's bonds. "You go," the chief said in broken English. "But bad men come behind. Many guns." "How far?" Colton asked, rubbing his wrists. "Half day," the chief said. "They have silver eyes, man." "Boone. He killed my brother 2 moons ago." The chief said, his face darkening. "We wait for him. You go. Take horse." He gestured to a sturdy Mustang tied near the fire. "A gift." Colton looked at the chief. "Thank you." "Go," the chief said. "Black Rock is bad place. Spirits angry there. Do not take what is not yours." London and Colton mounted the Mustang. It was fresh and strong. As they rode out of the valley, London looked back. The Shoshone warriors were melting into the rocks, disappearing into the landscape. They were setting an ambush. "They're going to fight Boone," London said. "They're going to slow him down," Colton corrected. "But Boone is a devil. He'll get through. We just bought ourselves a few hours." He kicked the horse into a gallop. The Black Rock caves loomed ahead, a jagged maw in the side of the mountain. "We're almost there," Colton shouted. But as they approached the cave entrance, London saw something that made her blood run cold. Fresh tracks in the snow. Horse tracks, heading into the cave. "Colton," she said, her voice trembling. "Look." Colton pulled the Mustang up short. He looked at the tracks. He swore softly. "Someone beat us here," he said. "How Boone is behind us." "Not Boone," Colton said, drawing his revolver. "Someone else. Someone who knew about the map." He looked at London, a realization dawning on him. Who else did Josiah talk to? Think London. Who else? London racked her brain. No one. Just you and his brother. Josiah didn't have a brother, Colton said. Yes, he did, London said. He wrote to him, a man named Vance Sterling Prentice, Richard Prentice. Colton went pale. Richard Prentice died in the war. I saw him fall at Gettysburg. Then who has been writing to Josiah for 2 years? London asked. Before Colton could answer, a voice echoed from the darkness of the cave mouth. Hello, Colton. It's been a long time. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He wore a fine grey suit, totally unsuited for the weather, and held a shotgun leveled at them. He looked like an older, harder version of Josiah. It was the man London knew as the town sheriff, the man who worked for Granger. Sheriff Miller. London gasped. The name is Prentice Darling. The sheriff smiled. Richard Prentice. And I believe you have something that belongs to me. The twist hit them like a physical blow. The villain wasn't just Granger. It was Josiah's own brother. A man who had faked his death become a lawman and manipulated everyone to find the fortune. Get down, Colton whispered to London. Don't try it, Graves, Richard shouted. I have men in the rocks. Drop the gun, or the widow dies first. Colton hesitated. He looked at London. Then slowly he dropped his revolver into the snow. Smart man, Richard sneered. Now bring me the locket. London clutched her chest. They had walked into the lion's den, and the lion was family. The interior of Black Rock Cave breathed a stale, ancient coldness. Richard Prentice, the man London had known as Sheriff Miller, held the shotgun steady, the twin barrels staring into her soul. Move, Richard commanded, and keep your hands high, Colton. I know how fast you are. Colton walked ahead, his muscles coiled with calculated rage. London stumbled beside him, her mind reeling. Why? She whispered. Josiah mourned you. He thought you died at Gettysburg. I did die at Gettysburg, Richard replied cheerfully, the sound terrifying in the damp tunnel. The private died. The opportunist was born. I swapped tags with a corpse and rode west. I knew about the Confederate shipment, and I knew Josiah had the map. He was always the sentimental one, keeping secrets for lost causes. You killed him. London realized the horror gripping her. It wasn't a fever. Arsenic, Richard admitted. Small doses. Mimics typhoid beautifully. I needed him to tell me where the cipher was, but the stubborn fool died before he broke. He kept mumbling about his heart. It took me a while to figure out he meant the locket. Colton stopped, his voice a low growl. You poisoned your own brother for paper. For $3 million in bearer bonds, Richard corrected. Don't pretend you're noble, Colton. You're a killer, too. They reached a heavy wooden bulkhead, remnants of an old mining attempt. Richard stopped them. The door is rigged with dynamite. Open it wrong and the mountain comes down. That's why I need the cipher. He tossed the locket to London. Read it. London caught the silver oval, her hands shaking. She looked at Colton, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Play along. She unfolded the onion skin paper inside. Right 3 to the serpent, left full turn to the eagle, right to the broken sword. Richard kept the shotgun leveled as he spun the heavy iron dial. With a screech of rusted metal, the door swung inward. Jackpot, Richard breathed. He pushed them into the small chamber. 3 iron strongboxes stamped with the Confederate seal sat in the center. Richard kicked the lock off the first one, throwing the lid back to reveal stacks of creamy paper. Beautiful, he whispered. momentarily lowered the shotgun to grab a handful of bonds. Colton moved. He didn't lunge for Richard. He kicked the lantern. The glass shattered. The flame flared and died, plunging the room into strobing shadows. "Hey!" Richard shouted, spinning around. Colton tackled him, and the two men hit the stone floor with a bone-jarring thud. "London, run!" Colton screamed, taking a heavy blow to his infected arm. London didn't run. She dove for the shotgun Richard had dropped, hefting the heavy weapon. She aimed at the tangle of limbs but couldn't fire without hitting Colton. Richard managed to kick Colton back, pulling a hidden derringer from his boot. Boom! The shot didn't come from the derringer. It came from the tunnel entrance. Richard screamed as his hand exploded in a spray of red mist. The derringer clattered away. London spun around. Standing in the entrance, silhouetted by the daylight, was Silas Boone. Beside him stood Levi Granger, looking breathless and terrified. "I'll take it from here, Sheriff," Boone said, his voice like gravel. "Granger," Richard gasped, clutching his mangled wrist. You brought him." "I couldn't trust you, Richard," Granger said, stepping nervously into the light. "Boone works for the highest bidder, and I outbid you." "Nobody is bidding on anything," Boone interrupted. He cocked his rifle. "Granger, load the bonds. I'm going to clean up the loose ends." He raised the rifle, aiming squarely at Colton's chest. "Any last words, mountain man?" Colton looked at London. "I'm sorry." London gripped the shotgun. She knew she had one chance. The Shoshone chief had warned them the cave was unstable. Angry spirits. "Hey!" London shouted. Boone's eyes flicked to her. London pulled the trigger. She didn't aim at Boone. She aimed at the ceiling. The blast shook the room violently. A deep, grinding groan echoed through the mountain as the limestone fractured. "The roof!" Colton yelled. "Move!" A massive slab of rock detached from the ceiling, crashing down directly onto the strong boxes and onto Levi Granger. The banker vanished under tons of stone without a scream. Dust billowed out, blinding everyone. Boone fired wildly, the bullets sparking off the wall. "Get out!" Colton grabbed London's arm, hauling her toward the tunnel. The cave was collapsing and the mountain was coming down on top of them. The mountain groaned, a dying beast crushing its own bones. Colton grabbed London's arm. "Move! Behind them!" Richard screamed as the ceiling gave way, sealing his fate with the fortune he'd killed his brother for. They burst from the cove mouth into the blinding snow, gasping for air as the mine collapsed behind them. But the nightmare wasn't over. "You don't walk away with my money." Silas Boone stood 10 paces away, a ghost covered in limestone dust. He raised a heavy revolver, his eyes wild with greed. Colton had no gun, only his Bowie knife. He shoved London behind a boulder as Boone fired. The bullet spun Colton around, spraying red across the white drifts. He fell, but not before launching the knife in a desperate arc. It buried itself in Boone's thigh. Boone roared, dropping to one knee but raising his pistol again to finish the job. London stepped out. She held Richard's shotgun, heavy and cold in her hands. One barrel left. She didn't think of the recoil. She thought of Josiah. She thought of the river. She pulled the trigger. The blast lifted Boone off his feet, silencing the tracker forever. London dropped the gun and ran to Colton. He was pale blood soaking his coat. "Colton." She pressed her hands to his wound. "The bonds," he rasped, eyes losing focus. "Buried. I don't care about the money." She sobbed, tearing her petticoat to bind the wound. "Home," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Follow me. Home." "No," she fiercely whispered, pulling him into her arms to share her warmth against the biting wind. "You don't get to leave me now." She held him through the freezing dusk, refusing to let the cold take him until his eyes opened clear and alive. 3 months later, the snow retreated from Brimstone Creek. A buckboard wagon rolled into town, driven by a man with a stiff left arm and a woman with eyes that no longer looked lost. London walked into the sheriff's office and dropped a heavy sack on the desk. "To pay off the debts of every widow in this town," she told the confused new lawman, "and to buy back the Prentice homestead." He opened the sack. It wasn't bonds. It was raw gold. Josiah had been right about the gold on his land all along. He had just been looking at the wrong map. Outside, Colton waited. "You sure about this?" he asked as she climbed up. "It's a lonely life on the mountain." London looked at the man who had saved her soul. "I was lost once, Colton," she said, taking his hand. "But now I'm home." They turned the wagon toward the ridge, leaving the town and the ghosts behind forever. And that is the story of the widow of Dead Horse Pass. They say if you go up to the Teton Range today, you can still find the ruins of the Black Rock Mine buried under a mountain of stone. Some say the spirits still guard the Confederate millions waiting for the next fool to try their luck. But the real treasure wasn't the paper in the box, it was the bond forged in the ice and blood of the Wyoming winter. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West. Writing a story this size is a huge challenge, so if you appreciated the twists, the drama, and the romance, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good Western, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next epic storytelling adventure. Let me know in the comments. Would you have taken the money or the man? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.